Good morning, everybody. I trust that we're doing okay today. I just want to say thank you to everybody for just their prayers in the last week or so with my brother's passing, and it's been a tough couple weeks for us, and a lot of mixed emotions, a lot of up and downs, and so from us as a family, we want to say thank you for the cards, the gifts, the meals, the gift baskets. Thank you very much. We are so appreciative of that. For today's a message, I want to look at going back to James before Christmas, and the start of the new year. We were looking at James, and so now that Easter is finished, and I want to go back into James and try to finish it up the next few weeks. So I'd like to read, James chapter 5 today, and verses 1 to 6. Now, before we go into that, I just want to spend some time in prayer. Heavenly Father, thank you so much for your love for us. Thank you so much for just the peace that we can have amidst trials and difficulties. We can come to you, God. You're always our rock. You are our strength, and you are just our hiding place. As we look at your word this morning, Heavenly Father, I ask that you will lead and guide us and speak to our hearts this morning, challenge us, convict us, and encourage us as well, Father. And maybe we walk away with something new. Maybe we walk away just having sensed your presence in a deeper way. We commit this morning's service to you, Jesus. Amen. So Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev used to tell of a time when there was a wave of petty thefts in the Soviet Union. To curtail all these thefts, the authorities put up guards around the factories. At one timber works in Leningrad, the guard knew the workers in the factory well. The first evening came out Peter Petrovich with a wheelbarrow, and on the wheelbarrow was a great sack, a little bit suspicious looking. "All right, Petrovich," said the guard, "what have you got there?" "Oh, well, just sawdust and shavings," Petrovich replied. "Come on," the guard said, "I wasn't born yesterday. Let's see it. Tip it out." So Petrovich did, and he dumped the wheelbarrow, and there was just sawdust and shavings. So he was allowed to put it back in the bag and continue on his way home. Well, this kept happening every single night. And finally, the guard, out of frustration, but also curiosity, had said to him, "Petrovich, I know you well. Tell me what you're smuggling out of here, and I'll let you go." Petrovich says, "Wheelbarrows, my friend, wheelbarrows." As I read the story, I thought, wow, what a brilliant move for Petrovich. The guard thought he was smuggling something out the whole time in his bag, And meanwhile, the wheelbarrow was out in plain sight, and the guard wasn't even looking for that. And so he really fooled the guard. I'd like to read James chapter 5, verses 1 to 6 here. And James says here, "Look here, you rich people, weep and groan with anguish because of all the terrible troubles ahead of you. Your wealth is rotting away, and your fine clothes are moth-eaten rags. Your gold and silver are corroded. The very wealth you were counting on will eat away your flesh like fire. The corroded treasure you've hoarded will testify against you one day of judgment. For listen, hear the cries of the field workers whom you've cheated of their pay. The cries of those who harvest your fields have reached the ears of the Lord of heaven's armies. You spent your years on earth in luxury, satisfying your desire. You fatten yourselves up for the day of slaughter. You've condemned and killed innocent people who do not resist you." Now this passage in James it seems pretty depressing. It seems, I don't know, maybe we should just kind of leave it alone and not touch on it. And the question I was thinking of as I read this, aren't rich people usually pretty happy? And so, but James here, he's pointing out how miserable their greed was making them. And he uses very descriptive language here. Weeping, misery, anguish, rotting, moth-eaten, and corroding. They're all descriptive and destructive words. The word wail in the original language means to shriek or to howl, which depicts the frantic terror of judgment of God. Now, is James saying here that all rich people are going to experience this? No, not necessarily. But what is James getting at here? The rich people he's referring to here were people in the church that were consumed by their riches. Wealth was something that was really driving them each and every day, and it ended up blinding them to the plight of the poor. Their desire for wealth and pleasure and greed had blinded certain people in the church. Now there is a saying that says, it will all come out in the wash. All the wealth and riches that have been pursued, writes James, ends up being a witness against us. Our material possessions, they rust and they can get stolen and we can lose them. And so the rust here is also a proof of the impermanence of the ultimate valuelessness of earthly possessions. And I found that from a commentary I've been reading on William Barclay on the book of James. James also continues his thought in verses 4 to 6. He writes about the injustice that had been served to the poor, who have been working for the rich. Again, here he uses descriptive language. The rich were living in luxury, satisfying their every desire. They had fattened themselves for judgment. They had fattened themselves for the slaughter, this translation says. You've condemned and killed innocent people, a people who do not resist you. So quite the language James uses here. So as I look at these few verses here, I see that the rich people were overdoing it. And whatever was in their way, they wanted to achieve this luxurious lifestyle, and whatever was in their way, they got rid of, they exterminated, so they could keep living out this selfish lifestyle. And so I was thinking, how do people get to that point like that? How do wealth and pleasure become way more of value than human dignity and human life? Now, up to this point, James had been teaching the scattering church about sin and deception in their lives. He taught them about true humility, being doers of the word, and not just hearers, but doers of the word, not showing favoritism, especially those who are poor, and treating them like they have value, and making sure too that they fulfill the royal law of Scripture, which was to love their neighbor as themselves. James also had been writing about how when we look at a mirror, we see what kind of person we are. But as soon as we walk away from that mirror, we forget who we are. It seems, though, as if some people in the church had been so caught up in wealth and pleasure, and they totally were pursuing that, and everything else around them just didn't matter to them anymore. And they had forgotten who people were. They had forgotten their purpose on earth, especially as a church, to serve the living God and to look out for the poor and to help those who are needy and to just treat people well. And they had forgotten, it seemed, to be doers of the word. They were listening to the word, they were going to church every Sunday, but but they weren't putting it into action. And so this brings me back to my thought. How does someone go from treating people well, being a doer of the word, to becoming totally the opposite person? That's what James describes us in here. It's like they've totally switched sides, their personalities. And as I think about this, my mind goes back to James chapter 4, where James is telling the congregation, that they were lusting after things, they were desiring after things which they couldn't get. They would commit murder just so they could get what they wanted. They would fight and quarrel and envy just to satisfy their own desires. And so there was this history of selfishness between the brothers and sisters. Now, not everybody was living this way, but it seems like there was enough people where this was a problem in the church and it needed to be dealt with. Now, what was happening in James chapter 4? Well, James is, first of all, taught in James chapter 1 that there was this lust or evil desire within us when we allowed those evil desires or lustful thoughts or things we wanted, and once we had allowed these things to take root in our hearts and lives, then we would choose to go after those things and sin. And James says it eventually leads to death. And James warned them to not be deceived. And so James here, he's got a higher calling for the church. He felt that the church needed to improve things in their lives. Now, some were chasing after money and possessions. And in themselves, nothing wrong with money and possessions. And often they can be quite useful in our own lives, and they can even be used to help other people out if we have extra to go around. But Jesus taught us in Matthew chapter 6, 19 and 20. He says this, "Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust destroy, and where thieves break in and steal. But store up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where moth and rust do not destroy, and where thieves do not break in and steal." And so there's this theme, or a key word here. It says, do not store up. Do not find worth and value in them, or your security in the possessions you have, and in the finances you have. Don't put your hope and trust in them. Yeah, it's okay to have them, but don't abuse it. Don't allow it to control who you are. Why is that? Well, I got two reasons here for you. First of all, they're temporary. Matthew wrote, he says, don't store up treasures here on earth, where moth eats them and rust destroys them, and where thieves break in and steal. So everything we assign value in our lives, eventually that value changes. You know what? If we're into food, food goes bad. Fashion goes out of style. Fashion is always changing. Technology, it's always outdated within weeks or months. And homes and cars and different toys, they wear out too. You got to fix them. You got to send them to the garage. They wear out over time. They lose their value. The second thing is Jesus said that they're corrosive. Rust literally means eating. Now, it could refer to the corrosion by rust, but just as equally to any devouring pest. Now, in Jesus' day, moths would get into people's clothes, and they would eat the clothes over time. Rats and mice got into the storage containers where the grains were, and worms would carry things into the ground and bury them. And again, thieves would come in and steal your stuff. So it's corrosive. It doesn't last. It gets eaten away. 1 Timothy chapter 6, verse 9 to 10 says this, "But people who long to be rich fall into temptation and are trapped by many foolish and harmful desires that plunge them into ruin and destruction. For the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil, and some people craving money have wandered from the truth, pierced themselves with many sorrows. Now, the pursuit of wealth and pleasure has ruined many a person. And it often started as an innocent desire, but overtook people in time without realizing it. Just as that security guard in the beginning of the story, he was blinded to the fact that, the wheelbarrows were stolen right in plain sight. The security guard wasn't even thinking wheelbarrows. He saw the suspicious package in the wheelbarrow. Aha, that's what they're smuggling out. When the whole time, it was the wheelbarrows. It was in plain sight. Now, sometimes sin, the pleasures we want, the way we treat others, the things we decide whether they're right or wrong, often they seem so simple. Like, of course it's wrong to do these kind of things. But we get blinded by the stuff that we are going after, and we disregard even the most obvious things. Now, it's not rocket science. Verse 4 of chapter 5, it says that the worker should be paid a fair wage. That's not rocket science that you should pay somebody what they're worth. It's not rocket science that pursuing a life of wealth and pleasure from a biblical point of view is not a healthy thing. And yet it seems that people in the church struggled with these issues. Things that were so obvious. Now, James has mentioned the rich a number of times throughout the book of James. In chapter 1, he brought out that the rich who depend upon their riches will be humiliated. So they should not let their wealth identify themselves, but rather live in humility. So if you're rich, don't go thinking, yeah, I'm rich and this is who I am. No, rather live in humility. Be thankful and grateful for that abundant of wealth, but don't misuse it. In James chapter 2, though James is not critical of the rich in chapter 2, he is critical of brothers and sisters in the church who show preference to the rich and shun the poor. And that's what the rich were doing. They were shunning the poor. They were treating them badly. So James is slowly building up an argument here about the rich and how they use their resources and how they were not honoring God with their wealth, with their resources. Now, just a note here, James is not opposed to wealth or people being wealthy. And I want us to pick up on that. James is not opposed to us being wealthy people. But the problem here James is getting at is that the rich people in the church were misusing their resources. They're misusing their wealth to get ahead in life and disregarding those around them, especially the poor. So what is the application here for our lives? For me, the question comes to mind, what are we pursuing? What's really important to us? As we see in the book of James here, that those who pursue wealth and pleasure, they're not always happy. They're never satisfied. It's always about getting more and more and more. Now, maybe we're not pursuing wealth as individuals, but maybe we're pursuing material things. Maybe we're pursuing a goal in life or lots of goals. Maybe there's things we want to accomplish, and we're going to do whatever we can to accomplish these things, and we're going to step over people, hurt people, to get to where we want to go. Whatever the case is, I want us to think this morning, what are we pursuing? What's got our heart? I think James chapter 4 speaks to the issue here. How can we respond to this challenge of the passage that James writes about in these first 6 verses? How do we respond to those thoughts? I think we need to go back to James chapter 4, verses 7 to 10. And James writes this: "Submit ourselves to God, flee the devil, draw near to God, purify our hearts, humble ourselves in the presence of the Lord." Now, we've all come from different places this past week. We're all dealing with the COVID situation and many different things in our lives. Maybe we've been laid off from our workplaces. Maybe there's family things going on. I know I just came from, dealing with my family this past week and my brother's death. And so we're come from all kinds of different places. And for a lot of us, our lives, we've had to sort of slow down. We've had to maybe reevaluate different priorities. And it's caused us to put our life on hold a bit. We've pressed pause. Now, in the Gospel of John, chapter 3, when Jesus is being baptized, John the Baptist had these words to say. John said this: "He must become greater and greater, and I must become less and less." So John's ultimate goal seemed to be that in his life, Jesus would take over and John would become less and less. When I look at the book of James, when I look at especially chapter 5, I get this picture that the people were rather thinking, I must become greater. It's all about me. It's all about me and my resources and what I want to accomplish. And they were no longer submitting themselves to God. And not everybody in the church was this way. Maybe there was just a select few, but James thought it was necessary to address this topic. Now, in submitting to God in all areas of our lives, we can resist the devil. Because he also has an agenda. He's trying to accomplish certain things in our lives. He's trying to draw us away from God in whatever way he can. And he's really good at distracting us. Just as the people in James, they were distracted by wealth and pleasure and getting ahead. 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 31 says this: "Whatever you do it all for the glory of God." And one of my favorite passages here in Romans chapter 12, 1 says this: "Therefore I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as living sacrifices, holy and pleasing to God. This is your spiritual act of worship." Now, I don't know what we're facing today. I don't know what you're dealing with this morning, this week. Maybe we have health issues we're dealing with. And maybe it's really putting us down, or maybe we have this desire for stuff. I know I struggle with that at times, I wish I could have stuff, I know it's not going to make me happy, but sometimes I just wish for stuff. Maybe it's the human nature. Maybe we desire popularity in our workplaces or wherever we go. Maybe we just desire to be the center of attention. Maybe we just want to get ahead and we want to build a name for ourselves, and we've been stepping on people just to get there. Maybe we struggle with our identity. We're not sure who we are, and we're trying to be somebody that maybe we're not supposed to be. And maybe we just want to be happy, and we do whatever it takes to be happy. I want to encourage us. I want to challenge us. Whatever we're looking for, let it be that our desires is first and foremost to glorify the Father. Dietrich Bonhoeffer a German theologian who lived during World War II. It's one of my favorite theologians, actually. He said this: seek God, not happiness. This is the fundamental rule of all meditation. If you seek God alone, you will gain happiness. That is the promise. I want to close us off this morning with a song by Michael Card. He's one of my favorite musicians as well. He's a good storyteller. And it's called The Things That We Leave Behind.
This is a song we wrote together a long time ago. How many years? 15.
Yeah, a long
Almost
time.
20? I had hair when we wrote this song.
And I was 15 later. There sits Simon, foolish and wise. Proudly he's tending his nets. Jesus calls and the boats drift away, and all that he owns he forgets. And more than the nets he abandoned that day, he found that his pride was soon drifting away. And it's hard to imagine the freedom we find from things we leave behind.
Matthew was mindful of taking the tax and pressing the people to pay. And hearing the call, he responded in faith and followed the light and the way. And leaving the people so puzzled, he found the greed in his heart was no longer around. And it's hard to imagine the freedom we find from the things that we leave behind.
Every heart needs to be set free from possessions that hold on so tight. 'Cause freedom's not found in the things that we own. It's the power to do what is right. With Jesus our only possession, then the giving becomes our delight. We can't imagine the freedom we find from the things we leave behind.
We show a love for the world in our lives by worshiping goods we possess. But Jesus said, lay all your treasures aside and love God above all the rest. When we say no to the things of the world, we open our hearts to the love of the Lord. And it's hard to imagine the freedom we find from the things we leave behind. Oh, and it's hard to imagine the freedom we find from the things that we leave behind.
I hope that the song was an encouragement for us and a challenge. I know for me it's often been a challenge with those lyrics. I just want to send us off this week. God bless you guys and encourage you. And just want to share, if you guys ever have things you want to talk about, feel free to stop by my office on Thursdays in Altona. I know with this whole COVID thing, it's a bit difficult, but maybe when it breaks up, just feel free to stop by, talk, and if there's things on your heart and mind you want to talk about or pray about, I'd love to be able to do that and with you and sit and listen and pray with you. Thanks again for allowing me to speak into your lives, and God bless you and have a great week. Take care.